Speaking truths to power, a statement that has been repeated several times. At what point do we have to speak truth to power? At what point must we apologize after speaking what we consider to be the truth? Recently, the Episcopal Bishop of the Diocese of Washington made a statement following the inaugural speech by President Trump to the effect that the president should consider some of his executive orders. And in her statement, she talked about President showing mercy to those who are already considered victims of his presidential order. The president was not amused, and all of us know that presidents rarely accept such views, especially after they are considered to have been made for the interest of the nation. My main focus this time is about the events that led to the demand for the apology. Speaking truth to power. At what time are we considered to be the errands of God in matters of faith, in matters of justice, in matters of prudence, in matters of peace and justice in our society? In biblical stories, we find so many people who had not been in good books with the ruling authority. More often than not, they had found themselves in trouble for challenging executive authorities or the kings. But to some extent, some of the kings were humbled by their truth, and they had no choice but to apologize. We have the story of this celebrated king, King David, was considered to be a humble man, a man after God's own heart. And this David made one of the most heinous crimes in human history, coveting a wife of one of his own soldiers, to a point that he had to kill even the soldier himself, plotting for his murder so that he could have time with the wife. God was not pleased with that. And a servant of God was sent to go and speak the truth to the king. The king listened to the truth, and with all possible humility, he had to apologize. At what time do we have to speak truth to power? First of all, we must be pricked by our own conscience, knowing what is right and what is wrong. So recently, when the newly inaugurated President Trump of the United States gave some executive orders, one of them touching on the immigrants, citizenship, crime, and those who must be deported. The Bishop of Washington the Right Reverend Marian Bode challenged the president to his face and told the president, Mr. President, show mercy to these people. There were so many categories of people who were targeted, and she mentioned them one by one. Now the question is, it doesn't matter who is to be attacked here, but what matters is how right was the bishop to challenge the executive order of the new president, the first person to challenge his executive order? And to what extent did we expect her to go with her sermon without mentioning critical issues affecting the American society? No, when America is affected in any way, the entire globe also bear the brunt of that effect. Many people had applied for visa. They don't know whether they are going to get those visas. Many people are in the stages of being adopted or being registered in America as citizens or something like that. But the question is, what is it that we expect of a preacher when a preacher stands to preach the word of God? More often than not, we expect the preacher to scratch our backs, to say how good we are, how delighted we are, how we made the right choice in electing some of our leaders. That is very, very delicate balancing act of responsibility of a preacher. Preachers who apologize after preaching their sermons, those are not preachers. Those are speakers. Those are people who are hired to speak. And when someone is giving a speech, you can make a mistake. But throughout my 30 plus years in the ministry, I always know that a preacher will always preach what he or she has been commanded to preach by God. You cannot go to the pulpit and preach your own philosophy. Your philosophy can only be a vehicle carrying the message that you have been given. But it cannot be the gospel. So when God directs us to go and preach the gospel, the first thing a preacher must do is to pray over the message. Ask God, you have sent me to this congregation. What word should I share with them? What message are you giving me that I can be able to adequately deliver without compromising? It's always hard to preach to an audience that already believe that they are right before God, that they are already perfect before God, that they don't need any redemption. They don't need any to change in any way, but they are always right. It's always difficult to preach to such a congregation. But here we are. We have to speak the truth to power at all times, whenever we feel inspired to do so. So asking Bishop Bude to apologize is like telling her that you are not sent by God to preach. You preach your own message. You must discount that message. One thing I want to share with you freely as my audience is that when we are called to preach, we are not called to preach the message simply because we are perfect or we are saints or angels who have just been dropped from heaven. No, even myself, I'm not an angel. We are not called to preach the truth to power because we ourselves, we are perfect. God does not use perfect vessels. God uses people with limitations. I've just mentioned one King David that God used to lead his people. He was not perfect. He was a murderer. He had his own limitations. The same applies to us as preachers of the word. If you expect Bishop Kodia to be the perfect one, and you start questioning my sermon or my message based on how you know me, you miss the point. Because God uses people differently. He calls us to use us. In our wickedness, He is still calling us. In our limitations, He is still calling us. He has a message for all of us. People of unclean lips. The old prophets who are being called, they had limitations here and there, but people had to listen to them. People had to listen to them. Despite their own limitations, they had to listen. They had no choice but to listen. So it is not my duty to say that Bishop Bude was right in whatever she said. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that a preacher cannot and must not discount his or her message, if at all that message had been inspired by God Himself, by the Spirit of God. If he does that, then he's finished as a preacher. So we cannot go to the pulpit when we are not sufficiently equipped, sufficiently inspired to preach the gospel. So it is not me whom we should be able to criticize. Just send me back to whoever had sent me and say, go back to God and tell God, we are inconvenienced by the message you have sent. A messenger has nothing to do with the message than delivering the message. So, my friends, as we navigate through this delicate issue of who is right or who is wrong, let's listen to our conscience. Is what we are doing as leaders right before God and before men? God's will supersedes all constitutions on earth. God's will supersedes all constitutions on earth, all powers on earth. So his will must reign supreme, irrespective of what. Inasmuch as we are feeling inconvenienced in any way, God's will must reign supreme of our own desires as human beings. I want to leave you by saying, go and read prophetic books. Go and read the stories of people like Nathan, people like Samuel, those who were closer to the kings and how they advised the kings. how they were forced to speak truth to the kings. You will realize that throughout history, it has never been smooth with preachers of the gospel, and it will never be smooth. If it is smooth, something is not right. That is how it is. Because our society is allergic to truth. But we must continue speaking truth to power without fear, without contradiction. God bless you, and please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share it with others. And also you can drop a comment so that we can also learn from you as well. Ciao.